Nobody said following Jesus was going to be easy. Nobody should have ever told you that. Because we all know from our own experience that staying faithful to everything that Jesus taught, did, is not easy. It does require letting go of a lot of stuff if we're really going to prioritize our lives around the teachings, the words, the actions of Jesus. If those things are really going to penetrate and become part of who we are, it's a lifelong journey. Sometimes we talk about people who are lifelong students, college, grad school, PhD, they're going to go to school forever. We are in school forever when it comes to being disciples. Because it does mean everything in our lives, how we relate to nature, the environment, how we relate to our family members, how we relate to one another, our work, our money, our relationship with all of this needs to somehow be affected by what we believe of Jesus. There's probably no better example of that than what we heard in the second reading today when Paul writes to Philemon. Philemon was a disciple of Paul. Paul converted him to Christianity. Some years later, when Paul is in prison for the gospel, as he says, one of the slaves of Philemon, named Onesimus, has escaped the household and has sought out Paul. And Paul finds this man deeply helpful to him. And he too, under Paul's teaching, becomes a follower of Christ. But in this letter that he sends with Onesimus back to Philemon, he is encouraging Philemon to reach down into his deepest being of who he is in Christ, and now receive back Onesimus, not as a slave, but as a brother. Talk about a change of frame of reference. Someone that Philemon owns, who has done him some bad thing, apparently, because in a little part of the letter, Paul even says, look, if he owes you anything, I'll pay it. He apparently stole from Philemon, ran away to Paul, take care of me, take care of me. But Paul sends him back. But he says, I'm not sending him back now just as a slave, but he's your brother. Someone that you saw as a slave, you now have to see as your brother. That is a big change that Philemon is expected to fulfill. But it's a good example for all of us of what needs to happen throughout our lives, that so much that we relate to needs to be done so in light of Jesus Christ. Reading recently some writings of Gregory Boyle, the Jesuit priest in Los Angeles, who worked his whole life, and has worked his whole life, with gang members and rehabilitating and providing them dignity and compassion. He tells the story in the community when the church had been open for the homeless and the Latino folks to come and stay in the church at night. Men in one part, women in another, children. It's a messy business. And there were members of the church who didn't like it. And there were members of the community that didn't like what was going on there. And one morning he steps out of the church and sees spray painted on the steps, Wetback Church. A real put down to call people wetbacks. migrant workers. He's gone on his way to a meeting with a women's group, and he tells them what he saw, and he said, I'll get one of the homeboys, folks working with him, coming out of gang membership. And one of the ladies says, oh, no, you don't. He's like, she said, if people are hated, if people are outcast, if people are treated ill, then we want to be known as the wetback church. He used that story to say he had no idea that this woman and these other women have felt such a kinship with people who others disparaged and thought little of. He went on to say a little further, I was at St. X High School the other day for their opening school mass, and I know the motto is men for others, which is a really beautiful, noble thing, man for others. Gregory Boyle, a Jesuit, takes it another step and said, but Jesus was not just a man for others, he was a man with others. He had a kinship, not that he had something to give to these people, but that we are one. We are not separate from each other, and no one is better than the other. Sometimes trying to be for, advocate for, can put us in a sort of a position of power. And he was reflecting that rather than that, we strive to be one with each other. And all of our relationships, that might be something that we're looking at, how we relate. How do we relate to our environment? How do we relate to nature? We're in what's called the season of creation that Pope Francis initiated some years ago, from the 1st of September to the Feast of St. Francis, October 4th, the season of creation. How is your relationship to the environment and to nature? Is it shaped by your Christian values? Are we moving away from wastefulness? Are we moving away from abusing the earth and everything that's here? Because we are one with the earth. We are not just the users of our environment, but the environment is part of us. And that connection we need to have with one another, with family members, with the people with whom you work. Are our relationships more and more shaped by what we believe that Jesus is teaching us? Part of what he said today, you take up your cross each day. We bear sometimes the weight of the problems of the world. That's the cross that I sometimes feel like we're carrying. Not just our own personal problems, but the weight of the world sometimes is on our shoulders. It can pull us down. How are we in relationship to that cross? How are we in relationship to how we use our money? What's my relationship to people who are different from myself? The gospel challenges us to have this kinship with everything that is in the world. If we're going to be really students of Jesus Christ, and he obviously is the master that we want to be following. It's a life journey. We don't just suddenly wake up and have it all figured out. It's a life journey, trying to absorb gospel values, teachings of Jesus, and making them effective in all of our relationships. If Philemon was able to do that big change from thinking of this man as his slave to now giving him a hug as a brother. A big change that took place there. In one sense, we're invited to give a hug to everything in the world as our sisters and brothers. We're all one in this. And that is key, I think, to being disciples of Jesus. So you might reflect or try. It's hard when we're living our day-to-day lives and we're going about just getting the next task done. Sometimes it's hard to be conscious. Am I doing this task as Christ would have me do it? Am I doing this as the gospel would indicate I should? It's hard to do that. But if we could remind ourselves at least once in a while, am I acting as a gospel person? Am I doing this out of the love of Jesus Christ? It might change the tenor of many of our relationships. So maybe in the week ahead, we might, from time to time at least, check an inner check of ourselves. How much am I being brother or sister to those around me, to everything that's in my care?